Hello and welcome to the GCI Summit. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Tomas Kunstmonas from Sanobiotec. And within this talk, we're going to be examining minor cannabinoids and their variety of uses within products, within the cannabis industry. Tomas, great to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, without further ado, Tomas, let's dive straight in. To kick us off, could you talk our listeners through perhaps what the difficulties are in extracting minor cannabinoids from plant biomass? And perhaps as an extension of that, which cannabinoids do you see that prove really more problematic than others in extracting the sort of necessary quantities of that cannabinoid?
Sure, it's a great question. So to begin with, it's important to understand that the cannabis plant contains over 140 different cannabinoids, and only a handful of which have been identified and understood well enough to be used in the wellness and pharmaceutical markets. So when it comes to extraction, the only two cannabinoids that we see as viable for economically, for extraction are CBD and CBG. The reason being is simple, that their quantities are sufficient within the plant, that going through the whole process and purification, you still get meaningful amounts at the proper price. Everything else, is much more difficult. So the main issue is, of course, genetics, and we see companies now trying hard to develop new genetics, that would contain more of the minor cannabinoids. So, for example, CBN is a minor cannabinoid that is now sort of growing a lot in terms of the demand and consumer satisfaction. But it's still very difficult, so the companies are forced to look at other ways to produce these cannabinoids. And we don't think that the time will come at any point in the future when extracting these cannabinoids will be more viable than using other methods.
And Tomas, perhaps to build upon that, what other methods are there for creating minor cannabinoids? And could you tell me a little bit about the R&D initiatives that you guys are spearheading within your organization?
Sure. So we actually looked at all three different methods, meaning extraction and purification. The second one is biosynthesis, which essentially means you modify microorganisms, which then produce cannabinoids, which you then purify and get the isolates. And the last method is chemical synthesis. So we tried all of them, and we have invested substantial money into R&D, to thoroughly test it, with this idea in mind that the end product should not be CBD or THC, but the minor cannabinoids. So the reason why we have chosen chemical synthesis is quite simple, because we managed to master these methods. And in addition to what it means to master, right? So it's not that we can just produce 5 grams of each. It means we can produce these minor cannabinoids at very large scale, at low cost, full consistency, and maximum purity. So this was the goal. So after around almost 2 years of testing, we're now at the stage where we can produce pretty much any minor cannabinoid at very large scale and very fast.
Now, in the cannabis space, there often is lots of conversation about sort of what is better to use, those cannabinoids derived from the plant and those cannabinoids made in the lab. What are the common reservations that people might have when discussing plant-derived, lab-derived cannabinoids, perhaps, touching upon quality, consistent efficacy, and as an extension of that, how are you able to, answer or dispel those reservations?
Sure. So to begin with, there is a certain sort of stigma against synthetic cannabinoids, or to be honest, synthetic anything. If you take any compound, if you tell people it's synthetic, they're sort of like a bit, almost afraid of it, But the truth is that, to achieve the quality, that we look for, the synthetic is a much better way. So when you take any kind of hemp or cannabis plant, especially those that are cultivated outdoors, the truth is that, the plant absorbs a lot of stuff, a lot of different particles from the ground, which includes things like pesticides, mycotoxins, heavy metals, and whatnot. And then, when you're producing something from the plant, you're faced with this challenge to somehow filter out these compounds. And then the process and the method becomes very difficult and to be honest, also very expensive. So we have also done extraction, we know what it means, and we have tested hundreds of samples of various hemp plants from all across Europe. And we have not found a single one that after the full extraction, which really sort of makes all of these compounds much more dense and concentrated, that wouldn't have residual pollutants within the plant. So the truth is that the synthetic method or biosynthetic method is much better at the quality. When it comes to efficacy, it is essential to notice that at the purity levels that we work at, meaning 99%, and often at times much more than that, sometimes it's 99.9% purity. The molecule is identical, right? So if I was to send our produced molecule and isolated molecule from the plant to any lab, they couldn't find any difference, right? It's exactly the same molecule. So when it comes to efficacy, there is no difference whatsoever as long as the molecule is identical to the one found within the plant. One of the arguments in favor of extraction is that there is the so-called entourage effect, right? That different cannabinoids combined together can produce certain effects. And in molecular that is true, combination of cannabinoids produces better effects. But if you are able to get super pure cannabinoids, both major and minor, in isolated formats, you can mix them in any proportion you want. And a lot of research shows that cannabinoids behave in such a funny and interesting manner that sometimes changing proportion can increase the effects of both or do exactly the opposite. So the research is still lacking, but for this research to progress, what is needed is exactly super pure isolated cannabinoids.
And with what you said in mind about sort of the similarity between the plant-derived cannabinoids and the synthetic cannabinoids, why is it that you guys then still approach three different types of cannabinoid generation? You mentioned earlier that you do extraction, you create cannabinoids in the lab. What is it about the three different types of cannabinoid generation that means that you are sort of taking those three different paths? Are there different potential end users for each? What's the sort of rationale there?
The rationale is that each cannabinoid is supposed to have an optimal method. So for example, as mentioned, CBD and CBG is quite easy to extract, and there's really good biomass available, especially in the States, and there are companies in the States that do it really well. So one of the main uses for extraction in the R&D lab is if you get a very interesting genetics. You can extract it and use the chromatography, split it into different components, and then really sort of do proper R&D on them. So initial idea was we will find optimal methods for each, but what we're seeing right now is that we have not yet faced a cannabinoid that we couldn't produce using chemical synthesis. So when it comes to commercial activity, every single product that we produce now is produced using chemical synthesis. The other methods are used more for R&D purposes. And when I mean optimal method, so what in addition to, of course, quality, which is very important, I guess the most important aspect is the price that you sell it at. One of the biggest hurdles in the market is that minor cannabinoids are still quite expensive. And we always ask ourselves this question, so how to make it cheaper and therefore more affordable? And in the end, what we want to get the cannabinoids into as many different hands as possible, right? So the price and quality ratio is what is really important to us.
Price and sort of the general marketplace for these synthetic cannabinoids is certainly something that I want us to draw upon later. But perhaps touching upon something you mentioned before, you talking about sort of the quality, the consistency of these cannabinoids. Within that, what's the testing process look like for the biosynthesized cannabinoids that are generated within your labs, and sort of what are the quality standards that you guys govern your product by?
Sure. So to begin with, we think that the quality standards and testing standards in the whole industry are still lacking. So we very much support the initiatives to sort of introduce additional regulation when it comes to quality. As previously mentioned, we have done lots of testing for various compounds, both on the market and that produce ourselves and on the hemp plants. And we think that it's quite a dangerous area. And to prevent any kind of mistake from happening, we have very stringent quality protocols. So in our facility, which is EU GMP compliant, we have a separate quality lab. Right, so we have dedicated people, quality assurance, quality control. So every single product that we produce, we first test in-house. So we have HPLC machinery, we have a number of different analytical methods that we put each product through the whole process. Once we're done with that, once we are happy with our quality, we also send it to third-party accredited lab. And it's very important to mention that we do not only test the purity of minor cannabinoids, we want to check all other impurities that can include heavy metals, residual solvents, mycotoxins, and some really exotic stuff. We have found some very small particles in the hemp plant that are potentially cancer-causing, and we found it, small bits of it in many different plants. For this reason, we did a lot of homework finding the right labs. One of the key aspects that we'd like the industry to pay attention to is when we look at various certificates of analysis, is what was the limit of detection. So we have met certain labs that say, look, our lab can measure 100 parts per million, and it's good for certain impurities. But we aim, to have the accuracy of 1 part per million of all impurities. So this gives us a much more accurate picture of all different products. And because we know that these products are widely used and they have not been used for so many years, so instead of having the standards that would allow us to sell it, the industry is sort of not well regulated. Instead, we have adopted the European pharmacopoeia regulation. So although we sell to the wellness market, but we ourselves, we have adopted the regulation that is required for the pharmaceutical companies. And this gives us absolute peace of mind, that we can sleep well at night because we know that our products contain exactly what we state.
And going on to the piece about the actual marketplace for these minor cannabinoids, what does the marketplace for minor cannabinoids look like? And earlier you mentioned topics around sort of price and differentials between sort of those that are derived from the plant and those that are biosynthesized. What type of differences are we looking at here?
So to be frank with you, on the market, there is no difference about the source of cannabinoid. As long as your cannabinoid is pure, neither the businesses nor the consumer cares much about it. And I think that's the right attitude. As long as I have all the proper testing, it doesn't matter, which method has been used, as long as the quality is right. So the next most important bit is, of course, the price point. And so I think a very important question is to answer, why minor cannabinoids are required in the first place, right? And to answer this question, we have to take a look at why people use CBD, which is a major molecule, right? And the reason why people use CBD, because it helps with various different ailments. It can range from inflammation, insomnia, anxiety, and a whole list of other reasons why people buy and use CBD. And this is where minor cannabinoids come in. Minor cannabinoids have different effects from CBD. So meaning that, for example, when it comes to sleep, the consumers report that adding CBN, which is a minor cannabinoid, helps them not only to fall asleep faster, but also to stay asleep, which is the good thing. So taking CBD as a good example, CBN as a good example. So although many companies that sell it to the end consumers, they market it as a sleep aid, looking at a vast body of data of just consumer reports, consumers also report that it helps with acute aches and stress. And combining with CBD, it's even better. So this is why minor cannabinoids are now entering the market at such a pace as they are. And the reason why the adoption was slow previously was because of the price. Let's take CBD as an example. When we started Sanobiotec, CBD used to cost 20,000 euros per kilogram. It is now below 500 euros per kilogram and falling fast. So and this price sort of change has not yet been passed on to the consumers. It is still quite expensive for the consumers, and we hope that it will change quite soon. And minor cannabinoids have now become affordable. So CBN price has fallen, once again, almost 10 times in 1.5 years. But I mean, it's an amazing molecule. And other minor cannabinoids, such as CBC or THC, they are, we think, at least as interesting. So having this new price point allows other businesses to combine it into their products, and very importantly, at meaningful amounts. What we have observed so far, that many of the brands, they add minor cannabinoids, but for example, a dose of CBN is, let's say, 1.5 milligrams. And that's quite an inactive dose. So we really hope and we try to educate our customers that adding more of this product, will certainly increase the effect and will make the consumer much happier. So the market, we have to talk about two different markets. There is Europe and there is the USA. So the SA market is much more mature. We see a number of brands now moving into minor cannabinoids, not as a standalone product, but they combine it with CBD. And these brands are very happy about it. So looking just at California alone, which is very famous for its quick adoption, the consumer is well educated, and the average person has certain issues that they want to deal with, such as stress or insomnia or various pains, or perhaps lack of focus, which is one of the newest areas for cannabinoids to work. So minor cannabinoids have grown over 150%. The market has grown in the last 12 months. And of the top 3 edible brands in California, all 3 of them, their best-selling SKU contains CBN. So this just proves that adding minor cannabinoids at reasonable doses creates this consumer loyalty, and consumers are much more happy, and they get what they buy, right? So if you buy a product that you read should help you sleep, if it has CBN, in all likelihood, it will be much better than having CBD alone. The market is growing fast. Businesses are looking at it from private conversations with our clients, which include both white label companies and brand holders. A number of them are now developing products with minor cannabinoids. So we think the first half of next year will be this inflection point. At least for CBN for sure. CBN, has been on the market for a while, and its effects are sort of very clear. And we are very excited to see where the next year will take us.
So we focused a lot on CBN, and absolutely it is a minor cannabinoid which is burgeoning in the consumer goods space. What other minor cannabinoids are proving popular for consumer and consumer products, and why? And perhaps building on that, who are the end consumers that are most interested in these minor cannabinoids? I know before that you alluded to that lots of the folks that you're working with are brands and white label providers, but you also mentioned earlier that the standards that you guys work to are EU GMP, sort of pharma grade.
So when it comes to the wellness market, there are sort of 4 main minor cannabinoids that are gaining popularity. So to clarify, we think that CBG is no longer minor cannabinoid. It can be extracted from the plant. The prices are cheap. So we think CBD and CBG are in one category, and all the rest are in other category. So the 4 main that we work with are CBN, CBC, CBDV, and THCV. So we have these 4 absolute staple products, that sort of we sell well, we know how to produce, and clients are very happy. So the main effect of CBD that is reported is sleep. It sort of helps you to sleep in addition to a number of different health benefits. And this is just for the wellness market. It has quite different uses in the recreational cannabis market, which we do not participate in. CBDV is much more sort of medicinal purpose. We see a lot of evidence that it helps with various ailments, but much more research is needed. So the market is much smaller, but it's growing fast. CBC is quite a fine molecule, because in addition to really enhancing the effects of other cannabinoids, so if you combine CBC with others, sort of it really makes you feel the other cannabinoids much better. And this is taken from consumer reports. The data is still missing that we could state it as a fact, but hopefully the next year or 2 will bring us much closer to that. So CBC, as apart from providing this entourage effect, it has really promising indications for skincare. Oddly enough, I didn't expect that. If no one expected that, and some cosmetics company came across it, tried it, and it really works. So we will see next year a number of products with CBC for skincare to treat various skin conditions. And I think that will be very useful for the consumer. Last but not least is THCV. So the name is scary because the first 3 letters are the same as THC. But reality is that it has very little to do with THC. It will not get you high. You will not be in any way affected psychologically unless you take a vast dose, but that applies to all cannabinoids. And THCV is very promising in 2 different areas, and this all comes from consumer reports as opposed to some sort of medical research. So consumers report 2 very distinct but connected effects. One is mental focus. So when you use THCV, especially in conjunction with CBD, not only does it make you feel much less anxiety, which most likely comes from CBD, but it makes you very focused. So it has potential to be a phenomenal supplement for mental health, and we see that gaining popularity a lot. The second use is reduction of appetite. And this is very pronounced. I can attest to that myself. So we have this company policy that we have to test the products ourselves. And let me tell you, if you use a well-formulated THC supplement, I mean, you're really much less hungry and you're super focused. So THCV is, some people call it like the sports car of cannabinoids. It makes you focused, it makes you go fast, and it makes you very sort of efficient. So these are the main four cannabinoids. So looking at the market segments, the wellness market is, of course, the biggest market. Looking at different places, let's just take USA, for example, different states have different consumers, very different consumer base. So in very sort of productive states, let's take California, for example, right? I mean, the whole Silicon Valley and many great universities, we see both of these, all of the cannabinoids growing in popularity. The reason being is quite simple. As I mentioned, people use it for a certain purpose. And if you buy a certain tincture for sleep and it works, you will most likely use it. If you buy a THCV product, to suppress the appetite and to be more focused and it works, once again, you'll most likely reorder. So we are seeing very, very high reorder rates that our clients report in some of the key markets, and we're happy about that. Of course, the pharmaceutical market, they see what is going on. They see that people are consuming these cannabinoids. So we now have indication from a number of very high level, both VC funds and pharmaceutical companies that want to explore cannabinoids further. There are already companies that are doing clinical research, and we actually plan to enter preclinical trials with some of these cannabinoids ourselves. And then, due to the fact that our facility can be fully certified for pharmaceutical products, we intend to explore this market further. But of course, these are very, very difficult markets. Wellness market, where they're now, we have high capacity at very good prices, and we're just now starting to explore what the pharmaceutical market can offer us.
And Thomas, as our time starts drawing a little bit closer to the end, perhaps a final question or final couple of questions for you. And that is really looking at the overall market size of this space. So, of course, our focus for this conversation is around minor cannabinoids. What do you say that the potential market size is for minor cannabinoids? And given everything that we've spoken about today, are we at a place where we should be talking about the potential market size for individual cannabinoids like CBN, CBC, THCV, rather than looking at minor cannabinoids as a whole?
We're getting much closer to that point. So I wouldn't sort of dare to say a number out loud, how large we think the minor cannabinoid market is. But the reason being is this, that the wholesale sales are growing very fast, that some of these sales go to companies that are just developing the products. And all of them will launch these products to the market in the first half of next year. So I think that in the second half of next year, there'll be reliable market reports that will be able to state how large the minor cannabinoid market is. It will still be far from CBD, but we're still talking hundreds of millions, if not billions, per year globally. And in terms of looking at minor cannabinoids as a whole, or looking at standalone ones, so the two cannabinoids that we think will have a standalone market, and it will be a significant market, are CBN and THCV. And there are now new companies actually, that focus only on one cannabinoid each. And most likely they think that this will be sufficient to build a sizable business.
And Thomas, before we wrap, any final thoughts from your side that you think is particularly pertinent to share with our audience?
Well, I mean, the key takeaway and insight, if any, from this interview is that those who are in this industry, I think it's really worth to take a good look at minor cannabinoids. It's still a very, very early stage of the market, both in the wellness space, or if you're brands or if you're white label companies, I encourage you to contact us. We can provide you with any information you require. And if you're in the pharmaceutical market, I strongly encourage you to look at the potential effects that minor cannabinoids can deliver. I think it will be a massive market, and it will deliver a substantially improved quality of life. Once all the research is done, I think it will benefit humans at large.
Well, Thomas, it's been absolutely fantastic speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us. And viewer, if you do have any questions or queries for Thomas, I would implore you to jump straight onto the networking system on the GCI Summit platform. There is a whole array of possibilities to pick the brains of our thought leaders on the Summit platform. You're able to send direct messages with questions, you can propose meetings, you can even set up video calls, kind of like this. Lots of possibilities to pick the brains of our thought leaders, and I'm sure they'll be all the more happy to hear from you. But for the time being, I'd like to say once again, Thomas, thank you so much for joining us at the GCI Summit.
Thank you for having me.